Okay, this is Chapter 7, the first chapter in Unit 3 on the courts, and so I believe you have a forum over this, do you not? So you will listen to Part A, which is this first one, and then Part B, and then you can take the forum or complete the forum when you're finished. So, all right, the diagram you see here is a structure of the federal court system. As you see, the U.S. Supreme Court is the highest court in the land. All federal appeals have the potential to reach there, and appeals from state courts if, number one, they involve a constitutional question, and number two, they have exhausted all remedies at the state level, which means they've went through their state court, Supreme Court as well too. So you can see here there are 9 justices, one who's appointed as the chief for the U.S. Supreme Court. We have 12 United States Courts of Appeals. We have 90-some federal circuit courts or district courts. We aren't concerned with the military appeals, but 94 district courts, and of course a few others as well too. And also we'll talk about it later. Okay, so the federal court is what we call a 3-tiered system. There are the district courts, circuit courts of appeal, and the Supreme Court. At the state level, it depends on the state. Some of them have 3 levels and are simply mirrors of the federal system, and Missouri is one of those. Other states only have 2 levels. But Illinois and Missouri are both 3-tiered systems at the state level, just like the federal government. All right, a big term that you need to know is the term jurisdiction. Jurisdiction simply means the power to hear a case, but there are all kinds of jurisdiction. There is original jurisdiction, and under the idea or the concept of venue, it means that the case will be heard in the nearest and most accessible court within that jurisdiction. So if you're in Cape Girardeau County, when you commit a crime, you'll go to Jackson and go to Cape County Court, and that will be the court of original jurisdiction. That also is trial jurisdiction, because they have the right to actually hold a trial, introduce evidence, call witnesses, seat a jury, as opposed to appellate jurisdiction, which only reviews cases after a decision has been reached by the original court, and it's usually heard in 3-judge panels. Sometimes we talk about exclusive jurisdiction. So, for example, the U.S. Supreme Court has exclusive jurisdiction on feuds between states. So if Missouri and Illinois are arguing over water rights because something is dammed up, obviously if you try it in Illinois, they'll win. If you try it in Missouri, they'll win. So the Supreme Court has exclusive jurisdictions on disputes between states. The juvenile court has exclusive jurisdiction by age under some people. The counterpart to exclusive jurisdiction is concurrent jurisdiction. It means that more than one jurisdiction or more than one court can have jurisdiction. Probably the best example I can give you is robbing a bank. Most banks are federally insured. If you still have a checkbook, look at it, it says FDIC, Federal Depositors Insurance Corporation. And it is a federal offense, to rob a federally insured bank. And those of you from around the Cape Jackson area, the bank across the street from Andy's has probably been robbed more than anybody. And most of the time the federal government, FBI, will investigate those cases. But the state of Missouri also has jurisdiction. It still is a robbery or an armed robbery. And the last, there is the distinction between general jurisdiction. Those trial courts are general jurisdiction. They hear a lot of everything. If you go over to Cape County Court, you can see a divorce, you can see a criminal trial, you can see a personal injury liability suit, just all kinds of different things. Whereas the juvenile court is limited. It can only hear cases of people under a certain age. Drug court, the same type of thing. Even the appellate courts, they can only hear cases that have already been heard. One other thing I want you to take note of here. We talk about the dual court system in the United States, federal versus state. So in some ways you might say we have 51 different court systems because of the 50 states. But we make that distinction, federal and state. That's why we call it the dual court system. But our system of trial is called an adversary system because the state and the defense are adversaries. They do battle in courtroom. And again, there's a slide that depicts original versus appellate jurisdiction. All right, development of the state courts. Started clear back with the colonies, even before we were the United States. And by the time we did become the United States, every colony had a functioning court system. But as we grew and as we progressed and as we became more complicated, there was more civil litigation, there was more criminal litigation, and the court system grew out of that kind of growth. So in the early stages, it was rather simplistic. It started with, municipal courts or city courts, and then moved to state courts. And again, those are those two models that we talked about. And you see more of the jurisdiction, limited, general, appellate. Okay, there is a call for more centralization to help bring about greater consistency. Some of that is happening. Again, there is quite a bit of overlap, as you might imagine. Where we're probably seeing the most centralization of anywhere is through the managerial side, the budgeting, the scheduling, the financing, because judges usually don't have those kind of skills. So a lot of times they hire a court administrator, and he or she may actually work for 2 or 3 different counties or 2 or 3 different circuits. And it's simply a more efficient and probably even a more effective way of handling it as well. All right, in the state courts, every state has a lower court system. They are limited jurisdiction. They can usually only hear cases up to a certain punishment. Some of them are fine only, but we had these when I was growing up in Iowa. And again, they're just very quick. They're pretty inefficient. A lot of them were very corrupt. But it's very formal. It's a good place to go plead guilty, And there's no detailed record. And most of them are funded by the court cost. So you pay your fine, the judge or justice of the peace or magistrate, whoever it is, gets his or her money by court cost. And I've seen cases where they'll plead guilty, they'll waive the fine as long as they pay the court cost. Sorry about that. Okay, the state trial courts, courts of general jurisdiction, any type of criminal case. Note there it is an adversarial process, and they can actually hear appeals from the limited jurisdiction courts, and there's no record, so most of the time they try them over, and that's what trial de novo means. That basically, because there is no record and there was not much formality, they just try them over again. But that's a term you need to know, trial de novo. The intermediate appellate courts and high-level appellate courts. Intermediate are the equivalent of Circuit Court of Appeals. So in Missouri, there are like 7 counties in our Court of Appeals. In the United States, in the federal system, there may be, there's 7 states in the 8th Circuit, which Missouri is a part of. What is an appeal? Actually, it is a request, and I would underline that, for the appellate judges to review this case. Now, they cannot review verdict decisions, jury decisions. They can review errors, procedural errors, and that's what they base their decisions on. You noticed up above there, every state has a state Supreme Court, and in most states, when someone gets the death penalty, automatically reviewed, even without appealing, by the state Supreme Court. Now, an appellate court, whether we're talking about those intermediate appellate courts, they have 2 or 3 different options. The most common is affirmed. That means the original decision still stands. Sometimes they are reversed and remanded, which means there were errors and they remand or send it back for trial, and they have to correct those errors. And sometimes the errors are so significant that it's just a complete reversal. If it wasn't for that, there wouldn't have been a conviction in the first place. So, affirmed, reversed and remanded, or reversed. The National Center for State Courts is kind of like a training center. They put on a lot of really good stuff to try to help the state courts improve efficiency, and of course, at the federal court level is the Office of United States Courts Administrative Office. They do all the budgeting for all the federal courts. They keep unbelievable records, and they have plans and strategies for management just like a large corporation. A couple other things that are, I guess they're not on the horizon because we're starting to see. One is the dispute resolution centers, which is very informal. It's kind of a form of arbitration. There's a lot of court congestion. We have more trials than we have space and prosecutors and judges and, those things. So if they can get and backlog, the average felony trial in the United States today occurs about a year after that act was committed, the criminal act. So no such thing as a speedy trial. So the whole idea is to relieve some of that congestion. Excuse me. By having these dispute resolution centers and resolve it without going to a full trial. The other are community courts. Again, these are lower level. Excuse me again. These are things like drug court, teen court, military court, mental health court, and again, same type of thing. Have smaller informal courts to take the pressure off the trial courts. Okay, so this is the last slide for part A. We're going to cut this off now, and then you'll also have part B, which are the other slides for this chapter.